Hi everyone, my name is Kris Spisak. I'm an independent editor and an author on a mission to empower every single one of us through the words that we use and the stories that we share. Thank you so much to Stephanie and everyone at the Boulder Bookstore for inviting me to speak a little bit about my most recent book, my third book, called The Family Story Workbook: 105 Prompts and Pointers for Writing Your History. Because we all have histories, right? We all have stories, no matter whether you call yourself a writer or not, we all have stories. And Stephanie was wonderful and passed on a list of questions, so I will dive right in. Question one: why did you decide to write a book teaching people how to write their own real life stories? And this is a wonderful place to start because, as I mentioned, this is my third book. And my writing has been growing over the years. I started out teaching writing. I was teaching the college writing classes where we were talking about empowering our language, how to write differently from different audiences when you're using a text message and email and professional communications, and how all of these are different. And it started out simply with word usage and my fascination with just wordplay and the way we can twist our words to empower our arguments and all of our ideas that we might have. And that first book was called Get a Grip on Your Grammar, and it really is the basics of word choice, punctuation, business etiquette, and the basics of storytelling. But after that book came out, working as an independent editor, I just felt like I had so much more to say. And it moved to my second book, which is the Novel Editing Workbook. Now, of course, this one is written for fiction writers who have that fiction manuscript, that novel that is all the way finished, and then they go, what now? How do I edit? What does that even mean? What is a revision? But through all of this, it started with words, it grew to story, but I'm not just working with fiction writers because, again, we are all writers, we are all storytellers, we all have our memories, we all have the moments in our life that shaped us. And I think after my first two books came out, I really felt so passionate that there's a wider audience here that needs to talk about storytelling. And that's where the idea of this third book came out. Now, my next question is, what first drew you to teaching writing? Well, I have been someone who has just been fascinated by words and stories for as long as I can remember. I remember hearing on the radio when I was a kid, there was a story about the etymology of the word posh. Now, why this word in particular sticks out in my mind, I have no idea. But I remember being in the backseat of the car and about 10 years old and a radio segment going on about how the word posh was developed from being on a passenger cruise line, port out, starboard home, Posh. And that suddenly stuck in my mind as this fascinating moment of words have history. Words change over time. They come from something. Words have their own stories. So I think that's where I started getting fascinated by language, little tidbits of etymology and word usage like that. And the more I dug into this as I grew up, I started finding out silly things like the word go, how it hijacked its past tense, went, from an entirely different verb. And this is where I can really geek out on that subject matter, and my blog and podcast both geek out on this stuff all the time. But I just fell in love with words and how we can empower ourselves with them if we use them well, and how fascinating it is when we learn all of that backstory. And of course, this is me, but teaching just empowers all of us. So I was teaching college for about 6 years, where I was just having time sitting down with students, working on everything from those thesis essays and arguments to business communications, and just everyone needs to know how to use their words well. And that's how I got into all of my writing professionally. My next question is, what do you think is one of the biggest stumbling blocks for people trying to write their family history? Biggest stumbling block? Pure intimidation, right? How many times have you ever thought that you want to write your life story? Or maybe if not your whole life story or memoir, maybe you've always wanted to write down your family tree and your family story and your parents' story and your grandparents' story, and that one great grandparent story that you know and that you have been intrigued by since you were 6 years old. But you know what? Writing that story can be sometimes quite intimidating. Where do you even begin with something like that? And that's where this new book came in. The Family Story Workbook is broken down into sections where I'm giving you very specific writing prompts about specific moments in your life, your family members' lives, moments to sit down with a sibling, an aunt, an uncle, a parent to share the exact same story from two different perspectives. There are lots of little tips and tricks through the course of that about how to get started, because as with any writing project, anybody who's a writer here listening might well know, sometimes the first part is the hardest, just getting started. So this is your roadmap, your pathway for getting ready to go. Okay, next question. When writing this book, are the pointers and prompts you list all from your personal writing experience and knowledge, or did you also talk with other writing professionals when you were creating this book? Now, so when creating this book, I have had 11 years of professional editing experience where I have been working with fiction clients primarily who have been going on to gain literary agents and publish top 5, maybe I'll say 4 now, big New York publishers, people who have been going on to indie publish and win awards there, people who have been doing all sorts of things with their own stories. So my years of teaching workshops on storytelling all kind of came together into this, because when you're telling a story, it's all about the details. It's not about, I remember walking into a room in a place and something happened. You want to get into the vivid details that make something real, from the smell in the air to who was there to what were you feeling and what was your response to something that happened. Storytelling is intricate, and this book came out of my years of fiction writing experience and ghostwriting experience and playing with all of these, but turning it to the world of anyone who has a story that they want to capture. And while this is a family story workbook designed for writers, but it could also be a family story workbook designed for someone who wanted to have a Zoom video chat with 5 members of their family. This is something that can be used around the Christmas table when everyone has one question that everyone can share their own answers. It's a story guide for anyone because, again, we all have stories. Okay, next question. Why do you think it's important for everyone to learn at least the basics of how to write down their story? It's a good question because, again, we all have our stories and how we tell it matters. We tell stories around the family dinner table. We tell family stories all over the place at cocktail parties in eras when we can go to cocktail parties. We tell stories all the time, and there's an art to telling a story well. There's an art to putting pen to paper and knowing whether you should be hyphenating that great-grandparent or not. There are so many subtleties in storytelling, from word choice to setup to punctuation, and a lot of my books go into these details that really empower your word choice, your storytelling, your arguing, your sharing of ideas, your mission statement, whatever it happens to be. One of my favorite sections of this book is not only just the recalling of stories, but it's also a recalling of definitions and some personal critical thinking, talking about what is your definition of personal success? What is your definition of happiness? What is your definition of success? All of these questions, faith, and all of these questions can be so complex, and we don't ever really sit down to ponder, to think. And this is an opportunity to, again, collect those answers from your parents, collect those answers from your siblings, see what you can build for yourself in this moment in history, but also for maybe generations to come. It's a worthy process for everybody. All right, do I have plans right now to use my own advice to write down my own family stories? Yes, absolutely. This whole process, not only have my family members been guinea pigs as this book was coming together, but this is something that I think has fascinated me for years, that I want to know the stories of my mom. I want to know the stories of my dad and my grandparents. And I have been that person who has been asking questions forever. I have been that person who has, in the era before cell phones with all of the wonderful apps that we have, I have had a recorder on my lap at a family dinner table to capture the subtleties of how neighbors and grandparents talk about intricate details about their life that I want to know more about, and maybe I don't even know what questions I need to ask yet, so I'm recording those details to know more. So I have been fascinated about this for as long as I can remember, and beyond a writer about writing, which is pretty much what I have largely been doing, I also am a fiction writer on the side, and I do have a novel coming very soon, hopefully, that is building upon a lot of the history of my own family in telling that story of what it is like to be a Ukrainian American family and a Ukrainian American family with history in World War II. But that's coming soon for another day. Okay, and last question, can you read us a short passage from your book? Why, yes, I'd be honored to. Once upon a time, a family changed the world, and maybe that family is yours. There are history books that tell famous tales, but there are also so many more stories to be told. Why not yours? Why not now? Why not capture it for yourself and for future generations who will have questions about what life was like and where they come from? Moments both modest and monumental can so easily slip by forgotten, if not recorded by someone who knows the tale. No matter your story or your family history, there are memories to hold on to and lives to celebrate and remember. There are world events, personal decisions made, lucky happenstances, and relationships forged in fire that shape the present, and that will reverberate into the future. What is amazing about people is that every single one of us has a story to share. Maybe we tell them, maybe we don't. Maybe we express them around the dinner table or at a child's bedtime. Maybe they are told in family histories or memoirs, or art, or dance, or poetry, or recipes. Maybe we tell our stories in the traditions that we pass down from generation to generation. However we tell them, it's important that we do. Knowing where we come from adds depth to our present-day reality. Sharing how we've become who we are allows for impactful self-reflection. Our world is not made up of singular narratives and singular versions of the past. It is made up of all of the complexities of all of our lives together. Families are as unique as skeins of yarn, and our communities are created by the weaving together of these vibrant threads, each of distinctive fibers, textures, size, styles, and shades. Tell your story, because that's what people do. We have since the beginning of time, and we always will. And your voice, your family's voice, is needed in this conversation. Thank you again for including me in this series, and I hope to connect with many of you soon. Feel free to reach out anytime if you're interested in more storytelling tips at krisspisak.com. It's KrisSpisak.com. Thank you again so much.